From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here in the Madison office today to share an interview that I did with Law Forward's Director of Litigation, Doug Poland. We talked a little bit about the congressional redistricting fight in Wisconsin and Law Forward's lawsuit that would seek to pave the way for new congressional maps in the state. So, here's what he had to say.
All right, thank you, Doug, for joining me this morning. I think to get us started off, there's multiple legal efforts that have been happening over the years aimed at redrawing the congressional maps in Wisconsin. The latest lawsuits are kind of related to wanting this three-judge panel to hear challenges to the maps. So could you just talk us through some of the legal arguments at play here and the broader significance of this?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me this morning, Kate. I appreciate it. As you noted, the current lawsuit or these challenges to congressional districts actually do reach back a ways in time. And I think that to get an understanding of the current context, we need to kind of go back. And if we go back to 2011, at that time, Republicans had what we call unified control over state government. So they controlled the state legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate, and then Governor Walker held the governor's office at the time. So in terms of legislation, they could essentially do what they want. And at that time, they passed two different statutes. We have both, our legislature passes both state legislative district maps after the new census data are released each decade. That's our Assembly and our Senate seats. And then they also decide on what the boundaries of our congressional seats should be. So Wisconsin has 8 congressional districts. And so that's up to our state legislature in the first instance to decide. So back in 2011, there were two different statutes that were adopted, Act 43, which put into place the state legislative districts, and Act 44, which put into place the congressional districts. So those were put into place in 2011. And the congressional districts, there were legal challenges to both at the time. Those largely did not succeed. They didn't succeed at all on the congressional side. So the congressional districts stayed in place throughout the entire decade. There was another lawsuit that was brought in 2021. Again, new census data were released in 2020 or 2021 based on the census taken in 2020. And so now we've got population shifts. The districts have to be redrawn. The legislature and the governor were unable to agree on new congressional districts. So it was up to the state Supreme Court to adopt what those new congressional districts should be. Well, in 2021, and then in 2022, when it actually issued the ruling, the state Supreme Court, which was controlled by so-called conservative justices at the time, decided that they were going to use a framework that they called a least change analysis. In other words, they were going to adopt, in large part, not exclusively, but in large part, proposed congressional districts that were based on the least number of changes from those 2011 districts. So they were going to adjust them as little as possible to make them comply with the population equality, essentially. And so that's what they did. It so happens that the Governor Evers, his proposed maps were the ones that came closest to making those least changes, but they were operating under that constraint, that straitjacket of least changes. And so what we see now, and those are the congressional districts that we have in place now. Those were the districts adopted by the state Supreme Court in March of 2022. So really those congressional districts that we see now represent the least change from those districts that were created in 2011. So to set the context there, we really have to go back to 2011 and see what happened there. And what happened in 2011, as it turns out, was really that the two political parties that were in control, Republicans and Democrats, and Republicans were in control, but Democrats, the other major political party, the leaders of the two parties really kind of sat down and talked about, figuratively, not literally, but figuratively sat down and decided on what those districts should be. Certainly the Republican congressional reps had control over the process, but they did ask for feedback from the Democratic representatives. The Democratic representatives were given the opportunity to make changes to districts that they wanted. And so it was very much a mutual decision in many ways between the two. And so you might say, all right, well, what does that mean for purposes of our claim of an anti-competitive gerrymander? That's our claim now. And so our claim right now, and I can get into more depth about it on a distinction between an anti-competitive gerrymander and other kinds of gerrymanders, like a partisan gerrymander. But the basic idea is that political parties shouldn't be able to sit down, essentially carve up maps to make the districts safe for incumbents or for their own political parties, respective political parties. That really dilutes the voting power of the people who live in those districts. They don't have a meaningful choice, a realistic choice. It protects incumbents. It leads to districts where there just aren't competitive races. The winning candidate is prevailing by 20 or 30 points or more. So it's the voters in the end who lose out because their choices are not actually reflected in who gets elected from their district.
All right, thank you for the overview on that. So I wanted to also ask you, there's a broader redistricting fight playing out nationally after what was kind of spurred by the redistricting in Texas. So could you talk a little bit about how Wisconsin kind of might play into that broader fight?
Well, I hate to disappoint you here, but I don't think it actually will. And the reason that I say that is that um, what we've got in place right now is, there are congressional districts, and we only have 8. So we don't have a lot. And I get it that the political parties uh, care about, 1 or 2 or 3 seats in different states. It might make a difference to them for control of the United States House of Representatives. But we have 8 districts. And what's going on in those other states right now is you've got unified control by one political party. So, for example, Texas, that you mentioned, controlled by Republicans. We could also look at California, controlled by Democrats. And so, what they are doing there in those places is they're sort of rolling back in some other states as well. They're rolling back efforts that were made 5, 6, 7 years ago to try to have a less partisan process for drawing new congressional and state legislative districts. They're rolling those back essentially to engage in an arms race to try to influence the makeup of the House of Representatives as much as possible. That's what's going on in those states. That's not what's going on in Wisconsin right now. So we have our lawsuit, which doesn't seek any kind of a partisan outcome or change whatsoever. It's purely based on competition. We would like districts to be competitive so that the prevailing candidate in any of those congressional districts is winning because they have views on policy issues. Maybe voters are basing their choices on character, but the prevailing candidate is winning because of something other than just that the districts were in the bag for them because they happen to belong to one political party. So I don't see our lawsuit in Wisconsin as playing into that at all. The other part of that is that, remember, these efforts in the other states are an attempt to influence the makeup of the House of Representatives before the midterm elections in 2026. We filed our case in the circuit court, and and it has to work its way through the circuit court. So cases to get decided in the circuit court can take years. It can take a couple of years. And, I think it's safe to say that whoever loses our case in the circuit court is going to seek to appeal. By statute, that appeal would go directly to the state Supreme Court, and that could take another year. So I don't see our lawsuit as playing into that national arms race about who can gerrymander their congressional districts more for one political party or the other, just to influence the makeup of the House of Representatives.
Got it. So it sounds like there's also just a longer timeline going on there as well.
There absolutely is. There is, I should point out as well, ours is not the only case that's challenging the current congressional districts.
Mhm.
Ours is based on, as I mentioned a couple of times, an anti-competitive gerrymander. There's another lawsuit that's pending in front of a different Dane County Circuit Court judge than our case. And they've brought their claims based on a partisan gerrymandering theory. So their theory does seek to invalidate the current districts as unfairly favoring Republicans instead of Democrats. So that does have a partisan angle to it. They may try to drive their case ahead faster than ours. I don't know. But there is that second case that's out there as well.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to add that you think people should know about the significance of these cases and just redistricting in Wisconsin in general?
Well, I think number one is we've made a lot of progress. So if we look back at what happened in 2011, we look at the extreme partisan gerrymander that was put into place back then, both in our state legislative districts and our congressional districts. We've made a lot of progress on that. It's been a lot of work by lawyers and others to try to do that, grassroots organizations. But if we look at the change in the state legislative districts, there was a significant shift, and they became far more competitive because of a lawsuit that we brought in 2023 that resulted in a decision by the state Supreme Court that actually undid the Supreme Court's previous holding that I mentioned before about this least change rule. So we no longer have this least change rule in effect. The other thing that had happened in 2021 and 2022, when the previous Supreme Court was ruling, is they said that they were not going to look at all at the potential partisan impact of new districts. They said that couldn't be considered. We couldn't put on evidence of that, and they wouldn't consider that. The problem when you stick your head in the sand about what the districts might, how they might impact the fairness of an election from a partisan standpoint, is you can stumble your way into a partisan gerrymander. And that's exactly what they did with the state legislative districts. They ended up adopting districts that had a very, very, very strong pro-Republican tilt to them, something like 12, 13, 14%. And so in 2023, when the state Supreme Court said, we're going to look at the partisan impact of the proposed districts, and then Speaker Voss decided that he was going to work with Governor Evers to put into place different districts, and they did that legislatively, and lo and behold, Democrats picked up 14 seats. So Republicans retained control of the assembly, but what that shows you is that districts are far more fair. And so we're sort of on that trajectory for the congressional districts as well. And the gold standard, at least as far as we think, would be to get to the place where we have a nonpartisan redistricting commission in Wisconsin. Let's take the politics out of redistricting. Let's take the partisanship and the gamesmanship out. Let's put the power back in the hands of the voters. So it's the voters who are choosing their representatives and not the other way around.
All right. Well, thank you again, Doug, for coming onto the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Kate.
All right, everyone. If you want to learn more about congressional redistricting in Wisconsin, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Kate Morton. Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.